So, do you remember this one? This was the Game Boy camera, which was released in February 1998. It was one of, if not the first digital pocket-sized camera ever released to the public. And this is its tiny brother, which I built just now. This is the Game Boy Mini camera and is probably the hardest mod I have built to date. And in this video I will show you how I built it, how you can too, and what took me so long to finally have a working unit in my hands. I am Paul, this is my little mod shop, and let's get started. So, who made this mod in the first place? Well, meet Christopher Graves. He's a well-known figure in the Game Boy modding scene for his extensive Game Boy camera mods and his contribution to preserving the art of Game Boy photography. For example, his Game Boy macro camera or his NES controller mod for the Game Boy to remote trigger the shutter. He also remade a one-to-one copy of the Game Boy camera PCB from scratch. And don't forget his extensive Camera M project, where he redesigned the Game Boy Pocket to fit in a rangefinder camera. But what caught my eye in particular is this Game Boy Mini camera project. They remodeled everything that is on this large PCB in a smaller form factor to fit in a normal Game Boy cartridge housing. I really love my Game Boy camera, but it adds extra space to my otherwise full bag that I could simply downsize with one of these. So let's take a closer look of what we need to make it a reality. Christopher made a guide to source all the needed components, and they even set up a PCBWay project, so ordering the PCB is as simple as clicking a few buttons. There are a lot of things like the lens array and the threaded inserts you need to order from AliExpress, but surely you can get them somewhere else too. To get a hold on the 3D files for printing the auto shell, you can order them straight from PCBWay. Alternatively, there is a Ko-fi link where you can buy the files to print them on your own. If you decide to buy them, I highly recommend printing them with an SLA printer for the best results. However, I only have an FDM printer, my old and trusty Ender 3V2, so that's what I'll be using. This is also quote-unquote the worst scenario of print quality and fitting issues, just to have said it and set expectations. You will see what I mean later in the video. Also an important note right here, I work closely with Christopher on this project. They helped me troubleshoot and even sent me the STLs for the cartridge, in exchange of the how to build videos you can find on the build page on his website. Again, all links down below. I have all the things ordered already, and while you wait for your stuff to arrive, let's take a closer look on how to print the cartridge shell. As I mentioned earlier, I will print all the necessary files on my FDM printer here. So this comes with a few challenges I want to discuss here in my slicer of choice, which is Prusa Slicer. So if you buy the Ko-fi files here, you also get some pre-supported files for SLA printing. They are all named with sprue in the name, so we can just remove those as we don't need them. Then we have to figure out a way to print those free files. The lens holder, the switch button and the front of the cartridge. The problem we face with these is that they don't have a flat surface to start printing on, so they need to be supported in a way. I will do this with organic tree supports, as this is the fastest way to print them. For the lens holder, I actually paint in where I don't want supports to go, as I want to have the threads clean to ensure it will fit together nicely. And I don't really care about supporting the lens thread, as I found out in testing that it doesn't really need it. Also make sure to print in the finest setting possible with your printer. I have a 0.4mm nozzle on it, so the smallest I can go is 0.08mm for super detail. And as you can see, this takes over 9 freaking hours to print on my old fella. I really need an upgrade soon. Look what arrived in the meantime. Okay, so now that we wait for the cartridge to finish printing, we can take a closer look at the PCBs I've ordered from today's sponsor, PCBWay. I have ordered mine in a matte black finish, and they also put some components down for me with their assembly service. I didn't choose to print my cartridge shell with resin. However, they are offering exceptional 3D printing services with SLA, FDM and even SLM, which is metal 3D printing. Besides PCB manufacturing and 3D printing, they also do CNC machining and even sheet metal fabrication. So they are the perfect fit for all your prototyping and production needs for your next project. So check the link in the description down below, and again, big thanks to PCBWay for sponsoring this video. Now let's get back to my PCBs. As I mentioned before, they already placed down some components for me, but there are also a lot of empty pads because we need to transplant those from the original Game Boy camera and the ones I have ordered myself. Let's crack the Game Boy camera open and take a closer look. So what we are looking for are these 5 components: the Mech GBD chip and D2 from the main board, and pretty much everything that is on the sensor board. which means those two capacitors, L2 and of course the sensor. This is the Mitsubishi M642A2FP. God, that's such a long name. And it's one of the first mass-produced CMOS sensors. Yes, the same technology as the one in your smartphone camera, only with a resolution of 128 by 128 and 2-bit color depth, which means 4 colors in total. Now to remove all those components is a little tricky. Getting off these capacitors and inductors is not that bad, but to get the chip and the sensor off, we need the big guns. A heat gun to be exact. So I removed the battery from the main board and start hitting it with about 300 C in a circular movement to distribute the heat evenly. After some time under the heat, the chip just falls off. Now for the sensor. It's a little bit different. You see, this component is encased in a resin, and although it can resist great amounts of heat, putting the heat gun on it could potentially damage it and render it useless for our project. And I don't have a second Game Boy camera around, so this one counts. So the trick is to use some flux on those legs and wick up as much solder as you can on both sides. Then gently try to get a toothpick or something thin and made out of plastic under one side and lightly, I mean really lightly, put pressure on it. Now I come in with the soldering iron and heat all the legs on one side simultaneously, and if everything works as intended, the sensor should lift. Again, don't put too much force in, as we don't want the sensor legs or the other side to be overbent. Now we can just hold the sensor and apply heat on the other side, and hopefully the sensor PCB just falls down. And with that, we successfully got all what we needed from the old Game Boy camera. Sleep well, buddy. Next step, actually soldering all the components down on the new PCB. This one is straightforward, as all the components are well listed on the build guide, so you know what goes where. All you really need is a steady hand, a lot of flux and a really fine tipped soldering iron. I'm not really good at drag soldering, so I solder on every leg individually. This ensures I have proper connection, but certainly takes more time. For the chips, make sure that you align pin 1, which is marked with a dot, to the corresponding point on the PCB. Then I match the chip with the pads and solder on the first leg on each side. This locks the chip down and makes sure every leg is in its right position. When soldering in the D1 component, make sure to position it the right way around, indicated by the line on the right side here. The sensor is also complicated to get right around, but make sure the part number reading on the back is flipped on its head. Otherwise, looking really close, you can see a dot in 3 or 4 corners. The upper left is blank. Now that we soldered everything down, it is a really crucial step to get through every single solder joint again and make sure that they're actually connected. I've had the problem before that the cartridge couldn't be read by my flasher, and I really questioned my sanity over this. By emailing Christopher about my problem, they assured me that there might be a cold joint somewhere and advised that I should check over all soldering joints again. I can't stress this enough. Check the soldering joints again if it's not working, because that's likely the problem. Now that all components are in their place and we take a little break, we get to the next crucial part: flashing the ROM onto the cartridge. Here is where I encountered my next big problem with the build: the realization that you need the GBX card flasher mentioned in the build guide. You see, I did a video about the Ben Joey Jr. a while ago, and it's basically the same product. Well, so I thought. But it seems that it's simply not capable of flashing those chips used on the Game Boy Mini camera PCB. Again, Christopher came to the rescue and told me the cold hard truth after I spent hours and hours finding a way to make it work with the Joey Jr. So I ordered the GBX card and was forced to wait another few days with the project. This is totally up to me, as I should have done more research beforehand. Nonetheless, still frustrating. Okay, so after a week or so, the GBX card finally arrived and I could start the flashing process. The ROM we are using for this project is called Photo. It is an open source program specifically written for the Game Boy camera and all its revisions to enhance the capabilities of it. For example, you can set manual exposure times, customize dithering, check the metadata of images you already shot, more color palettes and frames, and so much more we get into later. The other program we need is for the GBX card itself. It is called Flash GBX and it runs on my MacBook via terminal commands through Python. This is not as complicated as it sounds. Just follow the instructions from the GitHub I linked down below and you're good to go. Now it's time to connect the GBX card to my MacBook and click the connect button in the program. From there, I let it analyze the PCB to check if it works as intended. Then we click Write ROM, select the GB or GBC version of the photo ROM and flash it to the card. This takes just a few moments to finish. Now, if you get stuck here in some way, it is very likely that your soldering work is not correct. So as I mentioned before, go over every single connection on the board again. If the flashing process was successful, we quickly verify by putting the card in a Game Boy and check if the sensor is giving us a signal. Simply hold your hand in front of the sensor. It should give you at least some kind of exposure reading. If it is plain white all the time, there might be a problem with one of your components. I had L1 on the board soldered the wrong way around the first time, so start there first. Finally, all the parts are done printing, and with the PCB working too, we can finally assemble everything. The 3D print came out pretty decent, and the organic supports are easy to break away on most parts. The lens holder and the button switch needed a bit of cleanup, but nothing too bad. Let's begin by gluing the lens to the thread sleeve. Depending on your print setting, this could also be a friction fit, but to ensure it won't come out anytime soon, just use a drop of superglue or epoxy resin. Be careful not to get anything on the glass itself. Set it aside and let it dry for now. To screw into the parts, we need threaded inserts as listed in the build guide. I used my soldering iron like this at about 220C. Push them in gently, not too far, and be quick. Best practice would be to try this step out on a scrap piece of plastic a few times. Once you've done one or two, you get a feel for it pretty quickly. Then we can start to get everything together. First the PCB in the back shell, then we screw the lens holder in place and put in the switch. If you have clearance problems like I have here, use an X-Acto knife to shave off a bit of material just to make it flush. This is also an important step as we need to seal it as well as possible to not have light leakage ruining the picture quality. Next on the list, screwing in the lens. I printed the focus adjustment tool with the files, so it's pretty easy to do so, if the threads are not damaged of course. I found in my testing that you don't need to screw the lens in too far for the right focus plane. It's best to do this at a well-lit place outdoors with the Game Boy camera live feed. If you're happy with the adjustment, a small drop of super glue will keep it in place. We can put on the front shell and glue the protection glass on with, again, a dab of glue and screw it together with the longer M1 screws. And with that, the assembly is finally completed. So let's throw some beauty shots before we talk about all the features. Let's go! So this was a little bit weird, but we actually vlogging through my freaking Game Boy camera right now. It's a wild thing to say, but it kind of works, I guess. That's awesome. Alright, so as I mentioned before, this is the hardest mod I have built to date, with lots of setbacks, but in the end it was totally worth it and I'm so happy with the outcome. So let's talk about the features. This little cartridge enables the full potential of the Game Boy camera hardware in the smallest package possible. And with the custom photo ROM we've installed, we do have total control over exposure settings, making it the definitive Game Boy camera software. Taking a picture is quite straightforward, as it will start up in the automatic mode, just like in the original. While pressing the select button opens up a context menu where you can select the assisted and full manual modes, and there's also options for timer settings and auto exposure bracketing. Like the original Game Boy camera, we can save up to 30 pictures, but thanks to the memory chips we installed, there's an option to store and load 7 individual rolls, giving us 210 pictures in total. To get them off the cartridge, you can print them with the Game Boy printer, or by using the Game Boy camera album viewer in the Flash GBX software we used before. The options menu offer even more fine-tuning, like choosing a frame for printing the pictures and different color palettes. For outdoor use, I really found the thermal palette the best viewing option as it is very contrasty. All in all, it is very thought out and you can even remote trigger, but I haven't tried that yet. Now the cartridge has one more big feature I haven't mentioned before. You notice this little switch we installed here? Well, this one is to switch between the two flash chips we've installed, so it's possible to have a second ROM on it as well, like the original Game Boy camera software, or Tetris, or even Pokemon. This is so rad and gives the whole project so much more value, so you can take pictures in the day and game in the night. The only caveat with that is there is no way to hold a save for something like a Pokemon game, so it's more for games like Super Mario Land, Kirby or Tetris. All the ROMs are legally acquired, of course. And just that I mention it again here, printing those files with an FDM printer can be a real challenge. I even had to swap the front shell out because there were layer shifts in the print, causing it to not close correctly. So be prepared to invest some extra time here. But all in all, I love that the Game Boy camera now fits perfectly in my travel setup, and now everything that is left is to thank Christopher for this amazing piece of hardware he engineered, and of course all the contributors to this project. It's a group effort and it really shows the strength of the community in what is capable when like-minded people come together sharing ideas. That's what I am in for, and I really can't wait for what the future holds. I have linked everything you need to make your own Game Boy Mini camera in the description down below, and if you want to build a full custom Super Nintendo controller with LEDs and custom buttons, this next video might be for you.